But we have to understand that any plan that will be put forward, that has been put forward in the past or will be put forward in the future, uh, you know, until and unless it is backed up by real force, it is naive, like you said at the beginning. So we have seen that the moment Russians have heard about the Tomahawk missiles, they all of a sudden expressed a willingness and desire to meet and talk about peace.
Now, planned talks between President Trump and President Putin over Ukraine are off. The two leaders were expected to hold a second face-to-face meeting, but the two sides are far apart after Russia didn't want to discuss Donald Trump's ceasefire proposals. They would freeze the conflict where it is. Well, Europe is trying to fill the gap with its own similar 12-point proposal, which also envisages a ceasefire along current battle lines, but the plan has been criticised by analysts like Times radio regular Mark Galliotti for being naive. Yuriy Sak is a former advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry for Strategic Industries. Yuriy, good morning.
Good morning.
I think it's good to consider what perhaps the Europeans are offering, first of all. This idea that there would be a freeze of the front line is intriguing, given the front line, I think, is quite difficult to determine. Would that be your understanding as well? Where is the front line?
The front line current, there is more than 1,000 kilometers front line, and there is along the front line a 30-kilometer kill zone, which is an area where active military operations are almost made impossible by the use of drones. So yes, I think the Europeans, us Ukrainians, and the White House, we all understand that establishing a ceasefire along the front lines, existing front lines, is the important first step in this process. But of course, that's not something that Russia would ever agree to, as we are seeing already. And that's why, here in Kyiv, everybody's kind of skeptical about the possibility of a diplomatic solution at this stage.
Right.
Plus, we are all here right now. There is an air raid siren. All night we had missiles coming in, multiple ballistic missiles on Kyiv, the capital, and other places, cities in Ukraine like Zaporizhia, Poltava. Our energy grid is being demolished because Russians again hope to plunge us into darkness, ahead of winter. So it's not looking like a peace process to us here.
Okay. What do you make then of some of the other proposals from the European nations that Ukraine would receive security guarantees with funds to repair war damage and a pathway to rapidly joining the EU? Would that make freezing the current battle lines more palatable to you?
Well, first of all, of course, these points in that plan reflect our aspirations, and some of them are actually enshrined in our constitution. So our path to European Union, for example. So yes, this is something that we want, and this is something that would work for us. But I would like to say that in that same 12-point plan to which you're referring to, there is a very clear clause stipulated in black and white that Russia is not going to get any legalization of the temporarily illegally occupied territories. So freezing the front lines with the view to solving this aggression by diplomatic means in the future is what we see. We don't want to become a North Korea with Russian troops permanently present on our soil.
Yeah, so neither Europe nor Ukraine would recognise any occupied land as Russian as part of this plan. I guess the other bit of it as well, Yuri, to mention is that there would be a peace board chaired by President Trump to oversee implementation of the proposed plan. Would you support President Trump chairing that board?
As long as it brings us closer to a just and long-lasting peace, of course we would. But we have to understand that any plan that will be put forward, that has been put forward in the past or will be put forward in the future, until and unless it is backed up by real force, it is naive, like you said at the beginning. So we have seen that the moment Russians have heard about the Tomahawk missiles, they all of a sudden expressed a willingness and desire to meet and talk about peace. Why? Because they know very well that their own air defense system is degraded very badly. They know very well that on a daily basis, Ukrainian deep strike drones are hitting their oil refineries and their military objects. So, going back to my original point, every plan will be naive unless and until it is backed up by force.
Yuriy, thank you very much for joining us. It's good to speak to you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is Yuriy Sak, a former advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry for Strategic Industries. It's probably worth mentioning that Ukraine hit a Russian chemical plant with Storm Shadow missiles. These are UK-made long-range weapons. They penetrated Russian air defence system, and Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces say they were still assessing the outcome of what they referred to as a massive strike. Of course, Russia's always warned the West not to give Ukraine weapons capable of long-range attacks, but here we are.
Let's start with that Trump-Putin meeting. Was it a surprise to you to hear that it's no longer going ahead?
I guess none of us are surprised these days, are we, about what happens with Donald Trump? He's so erratic and he's so mood driven, and he thinks his personality is strong enough to move mountains. It seemed to work in the case of Gaza because he has more influence over President Netanyahu. He doesn't really have that over Putin. And so he has very little ways of pushing Putin. Of course, he could actually put additional sanctions on that he threatened over the summer and then he withdrew. He could put a lot more pressure on Putin, but he doesn't seem to want to. And so therefore, he just doesn't have the ability to push Putin to the negotiating table.
Yeah, and do you, I mean, it's a wild question because, as you state from the outset, it's very difficult to predict Donald Trump's behaviour. But do you get the sense from those around him, from the mood in the American administration, that there is a point at which Donald Trump will just say enough and he will do those things? He will put additional sanctions on. He may even consider new weapons for Ukraine.
No, in fact, I'm thinking the opposite. I'm thinking that the Ukrainians and the Europeans and everybody else need to assume that Trump probably won't do that. He hasn't done it so far, and get on with it and really probably still work on Trump. Don't give up on Trump, and probably work on Trump through maybe some of the business people. You know, Trump is on the phone with very wealthy business people every week. So find a few of those influencers that really they think have influence, but then work very hard with the Europeans to get the weapons and the support that they need. And then maybe also really double down on getting China to put pressure on Putin, because in fact, I think the only person at the moment that Putin would listen to right now is China. And so I do think they need a bit of a three-pronged approach, but not assume that Trump is going to come out of the closet with this incredible deal that he had been talking about.
Yeah, that's so interesting about China. And it's clear from the behaviour of those EU states that that is exactly what they are now thinking. There is this 12-point proposal. It's got a number of different elements to it. Some of them are things that we already know that Ukraine wants and has in its own constitution, for example. But the point about ending or trying to sort of end things, a ceasefire along current battle lines. What does that mean to you? Because we also had a joint statement from the Prime Minister and other EU leaders yesterday talking about that, but then also going back and saying, no, Ukraine shouldn't have to cede territory in a war.
Yeah, it's hard to say what the Ukrainians are willing to give up. It's really up to them to decide what territory they will want to cede. It's not clear to me that Russia would agree to any of that anyway. I really think Russia just thinks time is on its side and they just can keep barreling along and grinding Ukraine into the ground. And that's why Ukraine has been incredible so far, really innovative and done as much as they can with what they have. But they do need additional support just to defend themselves. I mean, we saw even last night, hundreds of Russian drones just whacking civilian areas, civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. And so they do need all they can to defend themselves. It would be great if some sort of deal were put through, but nobody trusts Putin to adhere to anything that he signs. He has form, right? He has a really a poor track record of agreeing really in practice to stuff that he puts on paper. And so I do think he needs to be pushed to the wall militarily. And then the pincer movement, if China could do it, there's no indication to me right now that China would. And so I do think a revised strategy. I think at the beginning of the war, countries were putting a lot of pressure on China, and China just didn't do anything. And so I do think maybe a rethink of that approach as well.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to see which country could try and take those negotiations forward with China, because it certainly couldn't be the UK government at the moment. Karen, thank you as ever. Great to have your take on the programme.
Thank you.